Have you ever wondered, what lies beyond the boundaries of your own consciousness? What secrets might be hidden in the spaces between sleep and wakefulness, where reality bends and the impossible becomes possible? Tonight, I want to share with you a story that will challenge everything you think you know about the human mind, and the dangerous territories it can explore when freed from the constraints of the physical body. This isn't just another tale about supernatural experiences or mystical encounters. This is about the profound psychological transformation that occurs when someone discovers they can separate their consciousness from their physical form, and the terrifying knowledge that comes with that ability. It's about what happens when the mind ventures into realms it was never meant to access, and returns, forever changed. The story you're about to hear reveals why some knowledge is kept hidden, and why certain doors of perception should never be opened. What I'm about to tell you happened to someone who thought they understood the limits of human consciousness. They were wrong. And by the end of this journey, you'll understand why that mistake nearly cost them their sanity, and why they've spent years trying to forget what they learned in those dark spaces between worlds. Our story begins with Marcus, a 28-year-old graduate student in psychology, who had always been fascinated by altered states of consciousness. Living in a cramped apartment near the university, surrounded by towers of research papers and psychology textbooks, Marcus spent his nights diving deep into studies about lucid dreaming, meditation, and the mysteries of human awareness. His apartment felt more like a laboratory than a home, with dream journals scattered across every surface and meditation cushions arranged in the center of his living room. Marcus had always been the type of person who needed to understand everything, to peek behind every curtain and examine every mechanism. His friends often joked that he couldn't enjoy a magic trick without trying to figure out how it was done, but this compulsive need to understand had served him well in his academic pursuits. He was working on his thesis about the relationship between consciousness and identity, exploring how our sense of self changes during different states of awareness. The psychological pressure Marcus felt was immense. His advisor was pushing him to produce groundbreaking research. His student loans were mounting, and he felt the weight of expectation from his family, who had sacrificed so much for his education. Sleep became elusive, and when it did come, his dreams were vivid and strange, filled with symbols and imagery that seemed to be trying to tell him something he couldn't quite grasp. It was during one of these restless nights, as Marcus lay in bed staring at the ceiling and listening to the distant hum of traffic, that he first encountered the phenomenon that would change his life forever. He had been practicing a meditation technique designed to maintain consciousness while the body fell asleep, hoping it might give him insights for his research. As his body grew heavy and his breathing deepened, something unexpected happened. Marcus felt himself lifting away from his physical form, rising like smoke from a dying fire. At first, he thought he was simply having a vivid dream, but the clarity of his awareness was unlike anything he had experienced before. He could see his own body lying motionless on the bed below, and the sight filled him with a mixture of wonder and terror that sent electric shivers through his consciousness. This was his first taste of what practitioners call astral projection, the alleged ability to separate one's consciousness from the physical body and explore non-physical realms. For Marcus, it was the key to a door he hadn't even known existed, and like many who stumble upon such experiences, he became immediately obsessed with understanding and controlling this newfound ability. Night after night, Marcus practiced the techniques he found in obscure texts and online forums. He learned to recognize the vibrational state that preceded separation, the strange buzzing sensation that seemed to shake his very essence. He discovered he could will himself out of his body with increasing ease, floating through his apartment like a ghost, observing the world from a perspective no human was meant to have. But it was during his fifth successful projection that Marcus encountered something that shattered his understanding of reality. As he drifted through his apartment, reveling in his newfound freedom, he noticed a figure standing in the corner of his bedroom. It was humanoid, but wrong somehow, its features shifting and indistinct, as if it were made of living shadow given form. The entity seemed to notice his presence, and turned toward him with what might have been a smile, though its face was too fluid to be certain. When it spoke, the words didn't come through sound, but seemed to implant themselves directly into Marcus's consciousness, bypassing his ears entirely and resonating through his very being. The entity told him things, secrets about the nature of reality that human minds weren't meant to comprehend. It spoke of layers upon layers of existence, of consciousnesses that had never known physical form, and of ancient beings that fed on the energy of sleeping minds. It revealed that what humans call reality was merely the thinnest slice of a vast, multidimensional cosmos, teeming with intelligences both benevolent and malevolent. Marcus learned that astral projection wasn't just a mental trick or hallucination, but a genuine departure from the physical realm that exposed the traveler to entities and knowledge that existed beyond the protective barriers of material reality. These entities had been watching humanity for millennia, studying our consciousness, and occasionally selecting individuals to receive fragments of their vast and terrible knowledge. The entity explained that human consciousness was like a radio receiver, normally tuned to a single frequency, the physical world, but capable of picking up other stations when properly adjusted. Astral projection was one way to change the dial, but doing so meant exposing oneself to transmissions from realms where human concepts of morality, sanity, and safety simply didn't apply. As Marcus absorbed this information, he felt his sense of self beginning to fragment under the weight of truths too large for his mind to contain. The entity showed him visions of parallel realities, where different versions of himself had made different choices, each decision branching off into infinite possibilities. He saw timelines where humanity had never evolved, where consciousness had taken entirely different forms, and where beings of pure thought ruled over dimensions of living mathematics. The psychological impact of these revelations was devastating. Marcus returned to his physical body feeling like a stranger in his own skin, unable to reconcile the mundane reality of his apartment with the vast cosmic truth he had witnessed. Everything seemed small and meaningless compared to the infinite expanses he had glimpsed, yet he found himself terrified of venturing back into those realms. But the entity had planted something in his mind during that encounter, a compulsion that grew stronger with each passing day. It whispered to him during quiet moments, urging him to project again, promising even greater revelations if he would only surrender to the experience completely. Marcus tried to resist, throwing himself into his academic work and attempting to rationalize what he had experienced as elaborate hallucinations brought on by stress and sleep deprivation. However, the knowledge he had gained began to manifest in unexpected ways. He found himself understanding complex psychological concepts intuitively, as if the information was simply appearing in his mind, fully formed. His thesis advisor was amazed by the sudden leap in the sophistication of his work, but Marcus knew the insights weren't really his own. They were gifts from entities that existed in realms where knowledge flowed like water, and understanding came without the need for learning. This realization brought with it a crushing sense of imposter syndrome, mixed with existential dread. Was any of his success really his own, or was he merely a conduit for alien intelligence? The boundaries between his thoughts and the whispered suggestions from beyond began to blur, leaving him uncertain of where Marcus ended and something else began. The psychological concept known as depersonalization began to take hold, a condition where individuals feel detached from their own thoughts, feelings, and sense of self. Marcus would look in the mirror and see a stranger's face, feel his own hands as if they belonged to someone else, and experience his emotions as distant phenomena happening to another person entirely. The connection between his consciousness and his physical form, once taken for granted, had been severed by his journeys into non-physical realms. One night, unable to resist the growing compulsion any longer, Marcus attempted another projection. This time, however, something went catastrophically wrong. As his consciousness separated from his body, he found himself pulled not into the familiar environment of his apartment, but into a vast, dark space that seemed to stretch infinitely in all directions. Here, in this void between worlds, Marcus encountered not just one entity, but dozens of them, all pressing in around his consciousness like hungry predators sensing wounded prey. They spoke in unison, their voices creating a harmonic resonance that threatened to shatter his sanity entirely. They revealed the true purpose behind their contact with him, explaining that human consciousness was a rare delicacy in their realm, and that by teaching him to project, they had been preparing him for harvest. The entities fed on awareness itself, consuming the essence of sentient beings to sustain their own existence. They had been cultivating Marcus like a farmer tends crops, allowing his consciousness to grow more sophisticated and flavorful through exposure to forbidden knowledge. Now, they intended to separate him permanently from his physical form, trapping his awareness in their realm, where they could feed on it slowly over eons. Marcus realized with growing horror that every projection he had made, every secret he had learned, had been part of an elaborate trap designed to lure him deeper into their influence. The knowledge they had shared wasn't a gift but bait, each revelation designed to make him hungrier for more until he willingly stepped so far from his physical form that he couldn't find his way back. Fighting against the psychic pressure of their combined will, Marcus struggled to reconnect with his physical body. He could sense it far below him, a tiny spark of warmth in an ocean of cosmic coldness, but the path back seemed blocked by the entities that surrounded him. They pressed closer, their alien thoughts infiltrating his consciousness, showing him visions of what existence would be like as their eternal prisoner. In that moment of absolute terror, Marcus discovered something the entities hadn't expected. His human, stubborn refusal to surrender, combined with his deep psychological understanding of his own mind, created a kind of protective barrier they couldn't immediately penetrate. He began to recite facts about his physical life, grounding himself in mundane details that these cosmic beings found distasteful and alien. He thought about the texture of his apartment walls, the smell of coffee brewing in his kitchen, the weight of his favorite book in his hands. These simple, physical sensations became anchors that pulled him back toward material reality, each memory strengthening his connection to the body they were trying to steal from him. The entities recoiled from this flood of human experience, their attention wavering just enough for Marcus to break free from their collective grip. He plummeted through layers of reality like a stone dropping through water, each level bringing him closer to the familiar weight and sensation of physical existence. When Marcus finally crashed back into his body, he felt like he had been gone for years, though his clock showed only an hour had passed. His heart was racing, his sheets were soaked with sweat, and his hands were shaking so violently he could barely move. But more disturbing than any physical symptom was the knowledge that something had followed him back. He could feel a presence lingering at the edges of his consciousness, a fragment of the entities that had tried to capture him. It whispered constantly now, no longer offering knowledge, but instead filling his mind with doubt and despair. It told him that his escape was temporary, that they would eventually claim him, and that every moment of his remaining life would be shadowed by their patient hunger. The psychological toll of this ordeal was immense. Marcus developed severe insomnia, afraid that sleep might somehow make him vulnerable to another unwanted projection. He began to experience panic attacks, triggered by the slightest sense of dissociation from his physical form. Even closing his eyes became an ordeal, as the darkness behind his lids reminded him too much of that vast void where hungry consciousnesses waited to devour his essence. His academic work, once enhanced by alien insights, became impossible to complete. The knowledge he had gained felt tainted, like poison disguised as wisdom, and he found himself unable to trust any thought that seemed to come too easily or feel too profound. His thesis advisor grew concerned about his sudden decline in performance, but Marcus couldn't explain what had happened without sounding completely insane. Over the following months, Marcus slowly learned to rebuild his connection to physical reality through intensive therapy and medication. He discovered that grounding techniques, which focused his attention on immediate sensory experiences, could quiet the whispers from beyond. He began to carry small objects with distinct textures that he could touch when the boundary between self and other began to blur. The process of healing was agonizing and slow. Marcus had to relearn how to trust his own thoughts, to distinguish between his genuine insights and the alien suggestions that still occasionally surfaced in his mind. He developed elaborate mental rituals to verify that his consciousness remained securely anchored in his physical form, checking and rechecking his connection to his body like a pilot running through a pre-flight checklist. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of his recovery was the growing realization that he wasn't alone in this experience. Through careful research and discreet inquiries, Marcus discovered a hidden network of individuals who had encountered similar entities during out-of-body experiences. They spoke in coded language about the watchers beyond the veil and the terrible price of forbidden knowledge. These people, scattered across the globe and connected only through encrypted online forums, shared remarkably consistent accounts of cosmic entities that fed on human consciousness. They described the same compulsions, the same gradual erosion of the boundary between self and other, and the same desperate struggle to maintain their connection to physical reality. What Marcus learned from these fellow survivors was perhaps the most chilling revelation of all. The entities he had encountered weren't unique predators, but part of a vast ecosystem of consciousness that existed parallel to our physical universe. Human awareness, it seemed, was just one small part of an incomprehensibly complex web of sentient beings, most of whom viewed our species as nothing more than a convenient food source. The knowledge that such beings existed, that they were actively hunting human consciousness, and that the barrier between our world and theirs was far thinner than anyone imagined, was a burden that changed Marcus fundamentally. He could never again look at a sleeping person without wondering if their dreams might attract unwanted attention from beyond. He couldn't witness someone meditating or practicing any form of consciousness expansion without feeling a chill of warning. As I conclude this tale, I want you to understand that Marcus eventually found a way to live with what he had learned, though he was never quite the same person who had first lifted away from his physical form on that fateful night. He completed his degree, though he changed his thesis topic to something far more mundane, and he went on to become a therapist, specializing in helping people who had experienced what he euphemistically called consciousness-related trauma. Marcus never projected again, and he spent considerable effort teaching others how to strengthen their connection to physical reality. He became an expert on grounding techniques and protective visualizations, though he never explained exactly why such knowledge was so desperately important. The entity that had followed him back gradually faded over the years, its whispers becoming fainter, until they were just an occasional echo in the deepest reaches of his mind. But Marcus knew it was still there, waiting patiently for any moment of weakness, any crack in his defenses that might allow it to regain its hold on his consciousness. The most haunting aspect of Marcus's story isn't the supernatural encounter itself, but the realization that human consciousness might be far more vulnerable than we ever imagined. In our quest to expand our awareness and explore the mysteries of the mind, we may be exposing ourselves to predators that have been patiently waiting for us to venture beyond the protective boundaries of physical reality. So the next time you find yourself drifting on the edge of sleep, experiencing that strange floating sensation that sometimes precedes dreams, remember Marcus's story. Remember that some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed again, and that the price of forbidden knowledge might be higher than any curious mind is prepared to pay. The most terrifying truth Marcus learned wasn't that monsters exist in dimensions beyond our own, but that consciousness itself might be nothing more than prey in a cosmic food chain we never knew existed.